Hi everybody, I'm Ryan, and I have made a bunch of videos about red black aggro. I've done a deck tech, a sideboard guide, nuances and weird things with the deck, flex slots, and how to build the deck. And what I wanted to do is combine all those videos into one large deep dive video. So here it is. Enjoy. And today we're going to look at the new hotness in Pioneer, red black aggro, or as I like to call it, red black sly, because it's a super aggressive, incredibly explosive aggro deck, just like the old school sly decks that the boss used to play. This deck can have you winning pretty consistently as early as turn 3 and as early as turn 4 if your opponent doesn't have some pretty intense interaction. It consists of creatures with prowess and heroic S abilities, pump spells, and a fling effect. So let's look into it. This is the red-black sly deck, and as far as the lands go, we're just playing red-black lands that come in untapped, like Sulphurous Sphinx, Blood Crypt, Blackcleave Cliffs, but also red-focused utility lands like Soken'Zon, which is pretty much free, Den of the Bugbear, in case it gets to the late game, you know, we deal chip damage and then they deal with our stuff, we can kill them with our lands, Reminap Ruins to kind of deal that extra damage that's really difficult to interact with, and Basic Mountain, because there's plenty of land destruction out there, like Field of Ruin. It's important we grab our Basic Mountains. Because again, the deck, especially the main deck, is primarily a red deck. And because it's a red aggressive deck, we sort of have to play Kamano Faces Kakazan. It's a 1-mana saga. Its first chapter is it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control. Its second chapter, which is extremely relevant, especially if we play Kamano Faces Kakazan in turn 1, is the next creature spell you cast this turn, that creature enters with additional +1/+1 counter on it. And its third chapter is it flips into a 2/2 haster with the effect that if a creature dealt damage this turn by a source you control would die, exile it instead. This is strictly our best turn 1 play. All 3 chapters do what we want to do. It gets closer to our opponent being dead, pumps up our creatures, and becomes a creature on its own. Speaking of the creatures we're looking to pump up, let's go through our creature suite. We have Slickshot Show Off, obviously. It's effectively a prowess trigger. When it casts a non-creature spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and you can plot it, and it's a 1/2 with flying and haste for 2 mana. Now, this is excellent because for every pump spell, like I said, it's a pump spell-y deck, pump spell you cast adds an additional 2 power, even if you cast it on something else. So this is one of the most aggressive, hardest-hitting creatures in the deck. And when I first read this card, I was wondering when I would decide to plot it, because it's the same cost as, you know, its normal cost. But you want to be plotting this card when you're looking to do a giant hit the following turn and you're worried about sorcery speed removal. Now, this does signal that you're going to be casting it the following turn, so it gives them a chance to leave up instant speed removal. But against decks like that you're worried about Portable Hole or something like that, like maybe against humans or whatever, then plotting it is almost always better, because sacrificing that 1 damage you might be able to get in if you just cast it normally on turn 2 is way worth it to make sure that you have the card to pump up on turn 3 with all your mana open. We're playing 4 Emberheart Challenger. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with haste and prowess, which again gets pumped up even if you're pumping something else, and Valiant, which is sort of like heroic except it's spell or ability. So when it becomes a target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, you exile the top card of your library until end of turn you can play that card. So this is a way to kind of be a reasonable, hasty, awesome, aggressive prowess creature that's really good with our pump spells, but also is extra good with our pump spells because we can dig through our deck and get through even more cards. Play Monastery Swiftspear, which you just have to play in pretty much every red-based aggressive deck. A 1-mana 1/2 with haste and prowess. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn when you cast a non-creature spell. Again, very good with all of our pump spells. And we're playing a Heartfire Hero, which is a 1/1 with Valiant. So whenever it becomes a target of spell or ability for the first time each turn, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So it's awesome to target with your pump spells. However, what makes it even better to target with our pump spells is when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So, I mean, naturally, you know, we're putting counters on it. Your opponent finally answers it. It deals 3 or maybe 4 damage to the opponent when it dies. But it also counts the pump spells that we are slapping on it. So if we're able to give it trample, like with Monstrous Rage or Ancestral Anger or something like that, plus making its power much higher, it becomes really difficult to block properly. That being said, let's go through our pump spell suite. We have a Titan Strength, which is, I think it's really cool that this card's playable now. 1-mana instant gives +3/+1 till end of turn, and you scry 1, so we can dig through our deck and have some card selection, and also gives 3 power. It's probably the worst of our pump spells, but it's very good. Monstrous Rage, which which is so freaking good, is a 1-mana instant as well. Target creature gets +2/+0 till end of turn, and you create a monster roll token attached to it. Monster roll gives +1/+1 and trample. But remember, it can only have one roll at any given time, so multiple monstrous rages. Like I think of this card as also +3/+1 and trample, but the second monstrous rage on something that already has a monster roll token on it doesn't work. So you want to make sure you spread out your monster rolls if you have multiple monstrous rage. But great pump spell. Additionally gives trample, indefinite trample and +1/+1, triggering all of the crazy stuff from the creatures. And Ancestral Anger. Ancestral Anger gets +X/+0 till end of turn, where X is 1 plus the number of cards named Ancestral Anger in your graveyard. Often this is just like a pump spell. It's sorcery, but it replaces itself and draws a card, and digging through our deck is really important. And very often it gives extra power, but notably it gives trample and always gives at least 1 power. So this card's very good. As far as utility cards go, we're playing a Claim to Fame. We can claim to return these creatures because people are going to side into a ton of removal against this deck. We can claim to return these creatures and keep doing our super aggressive stuff. And then we can Fame as Aftermath to give it not only at haste, but it also be a pump spell in and of itself, just like all of these. And Reckless Rage, being a 1-mana 4 damage target creature you don't control and 2 damage target creature you control, effectively becomes a 1-mana 4 damage to a creature you don't control, trigger Prowess, and often trigger Valiant on Emberheart Challenger, which Emberheart Challenger, the Prowess will go off first, which means it'll be dealt 2 damage, but it'll be 3 toughness by the time Reckless Rage goes through. We can trigger Valiant, be able to remove our opponent's creatures, and same thing with Heartfire Hero. If it already has a counter on it, we put a second counter on it with targeting it with Reckless Rage. It also works with Swift Spear because of the prowess thing. In the same sense, works with Dreadhorde Arcanist. Oh, I didn't actually talk about Dreadhorde Arcanist, whoops. But it's a great 1-mana removal spell. Dreadhorde Arcanist is pretty sweet. It's a 2-mana 1/3 with trample. Whenever Dreadhorde Arcanist attacks, you may cast target instant sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Dreadhorde Arcanist's power from your graveyard. Oh, my camera didn't like that. It's okay. Dreadhorde Arcanist won't hurt you. From your graveyard without paying its mana cost, that spell will be put in your graveyard, exile it instead. Look at all the 1-mana cards that we could cast, in our graveyard. Dreadhorde Arcanist is a little cute though, because we want to be just killing our opponent, and Dreadhorde Arcanist feels like sort of a plan B card, but a very powerful and a must answer plan B card. And then the creme de la creme of this deck is Callous Sellsword. Now, Callous Sellsword is a 2/2 creature, enters with a +1/+1 counter for each creature that died under your control this turn. That's fine. It's fine. If we're playing it as a creature, something's gone wrong, but it's fine. But really, we care about the adventure, Burn Together, where a target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to any other target, then sacrifice it. So the combo of this deck, like while it's playing a heroic-y prowess package, where you're pumping things up and trying to kill the opponent as fast as possible, it also has a combo where we're digging through our deck with Ancestral Anger and things like that, and an Emberheart Challenger, to be able to hit a creature that we pump up with prowess triggers and valiant triggers, and with our pump spells to make it as big as possible, preferably with trample so it's difficult to block, hit our opponent, say for like 7 is a normal amount we hit our opponent for, and then burn together it. So it can be double digits, sometime over 20 damage all in one turn, because sometimes you'll have multiple creatures attacking that have prowess triggers and whatnot. Additionally, the most powerful creature to do this with is Heartfire Hero. So if we have Heartfire Hero, we pump it up with a few different things, get some valiant triggers, like say it gets to like 9 power or something like that. Actually, let's say it's even 7 power. Let's say it's not very pumped up. We attack with Heartfire Hero, we pump it up a whole bunch, we get those valiant triggers, we hit them for a whole bunch. Often if it's trample, we already talked about how difficult Heartfire Hero is to block. Hit them for like, let's say 7. Then we burn together with Heartfire Hero, deal another 7 damage because that's what his power would be. And then we trigger when Heartfire Hero dies, it deals damage equal to his power to each opponent, another 7 damage. So that combo, I mean, this combo is already good with creatures that we're pumping up with our pump spells and prowess and all that stuff, but also absolutely excellent with Heartfire Hero. Is disgusting. Also, notably, it says target creature you control. So the Valiants will trigger off of Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger when you do that as well, and obviously as well as the prowess triggers. So that's how we're killing our opponents. A super aggressive pump spelly deck with an insane Fling combo. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, we're playing 4 Fatal Push for, especially since the new hotness, the mirror match, and other aggressive strategies. It's important to remember when you think about sideboarding, I'll make another video about sideboarding. It's important to remember that when you sideboard with this deck, you can't dilute the deck too much. So you got to be really, really careful about sideboarding. Thoughtseize for decks with removal or board wipes or, you know, things we're afraid of, or Beza or stuff, whatever. Another Reckless Rage just for additional removal. Playing a Hazoret the Fervent for against decks that have a lot of interaction for us, and then we expect the games to go super long. That's a 4 mana 5 power haster with Indestructibles. 4 power 5 mana haster with Indestructible is just excellent. An additional Claim to Fame to bring more things back from the graveyard if we really need to against these removal spell heavy decks. An Obnixilis that we're probably bringing in against a lot of decks that we bring in Hazoret against, just as to diversify our threats, but also to have a more difficult thing to deal with than just like 1 mana and 2 mana creatures. Gigantha because it is totally free in this deck, and then an Unlicensed Hearse for... Today we're going to look at how to sideboard with the new red-black aggro deck. I call it red-black Sly, that has been just tearing up Magic Online recently. Now, if you want an analysis of this deck, I did a deck tech on it last week. You should check that out. Today we're just going to be looking at how to sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks. Let's do it. So this is my red-black aggro list. It is pretty close to stock. And before we jump into the top 10 most popular decks, let's just talk about what each card in the sideboard is for. Fatal Push is for other aggro decks, especially since this deck is becoming so popular. Thoughtseize is against really removal heavy decks or board wipey decks. Reckless Rage is just another removal spell. It's especially good against decks where we would need to trigger Fatal Push to like have it do anything. Hazoret the Fervent is a diversification of our threats. It's really good against decks that are good at answering our creatures and decks that want to go really long, like Control or mid-range or whatever, to be able to just slam and have it be a difficult card to answer. Claim to Fame, we have 2 in the main deck, similar to us having 2 in the main deck of Reckless Rage. Claim to Fame is just one of those cards. It's really good against removal heavy decks. We can return our very few creatures, because this is essentially a prowess deck, to the battlefield, and then its aftermath is a pump spell, like a decent pump spell, just like the rest of our deck. Obnixilis comes in similarly when you are bringing in Hazoret, except Obnixilis is also good against some aggro decks because it can gain life and creates a blocker. So it works on both sides of the axis, good against aggressive decks because it gains life and creates a blocker, and also very good against the really slow decks because it's a genuine diversification of threats. And Unlicensed Hearse is our graveyard hate. Gigantha is just being played as an 8th card in our opening hand because it's pretty free, and having as many threats as possible is pretty important. So the most popular deck in Pioneer is the mirror match, which is Rakdos Aggro. Against Rakdos Aggro, we're bringing in the 4 Fatal Pushes, obviously. The 1 Reckless Rage, just as much removal as humanly possible. And we're just going to be siding out of a lot of our go long strategies. So I like bringing out the Claim to Fame. I like bringing out a few of the Callous Sellswords and bringing out the Dreadhorde Arcanist. The reason we bring out the Arcanist is really it's a card that is only good after your opponent exhausts everything and after you have a turn to attack with it once or twice. And I wouldn't rely on that in the mirror match. So this I sideboard in the mirror. The second most popular deck in Pioneer is It Phoenix. Is It Phoenix is a bit of a weird deck because it runs quite a bit of removal while at the same time being a pretty quick deck. So we can't dilute our strategy too much, but we have to stop them from being hyper aggressive and whatever. So we're going to be bringing in the 2 Unlicensed Hearse to keep them off the Arc like Phoenix Nut, and also it's very good against Treasure Cruise. We also in post-board games are kind of forced to bring in Thoughtseize because 1, they have plenty of removal, we can protect our creatures with it, and on the other side, a lot of decks are running sideboard Anger of the Gods, which can just wreck us. I think our opponent's deck is a little too fast to bring in something like Hazoret or Obnixilis. And while our opponent's deck has blockers, I'm not really worried about the blockers. I'd rather just pump through them and, you know, just kill. So I'm actually going to be bringing out the Reckless Rage. I actually don't like the Callous Sellsword Fling combo against this deck because they have a lot of instant speed removal we have to be afraid of. Oh, I forgot to bring in that Claim to Fame. We like Claim to Fame a lot. And we're going to be taking out 2 Titan Strength, which I think is our worst pump spell as a whole. So this is how I sideboard against Is It Phoenix. Third most popular deck is Blue-White Control. Against Blue-White Control, we are obviously bringing in Thoughtseizes. We are bringing in our diversified threats in Hazoret and Obnixilis, and bringing in Claim to Fame because a lot of Blue-White decks are now on Supreme Verdict. And you know, if something gets like just normal countered or whatever, we are obviously bringing out our removal. We're going to shave on the combo just a little bit because they can answer what we're doing pretty easily. And then we are going to shave or cut entirely, I mean, our worst pump spell. This is how we sideboard against Blue-White Control. The fourth most popular deck is Jund Sacrifice. The red-black Sacrifice deck, the red-black Cats deck is now playing a lot of Yigra Eater of All, which is really cool that splash is happening. Against Jund Sac, I found that the best way to attack it is to just kill as fast as humanly possible. They have removal spells, so we're going to be bringing in the Claim to Fame, and they are about setting stuff up, but I don't think we can afford to waste a turn by Thoughtseizing our opponents against this deck. However, I am a fan of diversifying our threats just a tad. Otherwise, I want to be all in. Even so, I'm going to be cutting our Reckless Rage because I don't care what they're doing. I don't care if they play a Bloodtithe Harvester or Mayhem Devil. Reckless Rage is really bad against Yigra, is pretty bad against Cauldron Familiar, etc., etc. And we're going to be shaving the Dreadhorde Arcanist because it dilutes kind of our main strategy, and we're just going to be all heckin' in. This is how I sideboard against Jund Sacrifice. The fifth most popular deck is Selesnya Angels, mostly as a response to this deck being like very good. Unfortunately, this deck has a pretty hard time triggering Fatal Push. So I don't like bringing in the Fatal Push, but Reckless Rage is an all-star against this deck. I'm also a big fan of Thoughtseize because we really have to stop them from gaining too much life. And otherwise, we have to be a super, super all-in aggro deck. Now, they aren't playing any removal to speak of. Some versions are playing like some Get Lost and Portable Holes in the sideboard. In any case, we're not a big fan of Claim to Fame, so we're going to be taking those out. However, that does make Dreadhorde Arcanist pretty good. And then besides that, we're going to be shaving some number of creatures. I like taking out 2 Emberheart Challenger. I think it's probably our worst creature unless we like actually capitalize on it like a lot. And we're going to be taking out an Ancestral Anger, mostly because it's sorcery speed, and it's really important that we kind of bait our opponents into blocking and are able to kind of blow them out with pump spells. And so, which makes Ancestral Anger a little bit worse against this deck. But this is how I sideboard against Selesnya Angels, which is probably a pretty bad matchup. The sixth most popular deck is Rakdos Midrange, which is coming back after the ban. Against Rakdos Midrange, we kind of have to treat them like a control deck. So we're going to be bringing in our Hazoret, our Obnixilis, our Claim to Fame. I'm also a fan of Thoughtseize because they're playing Massacre and Hitasugu in our sideboard. Both cards are crazy good against us. We're bringing out Reckless Rage. I don't care about their creatures. I'm just going to pump through their creatures. However, they have plenty of instant speed removal, so I'm really afraid of our actually using our combo. So I like taking out Callous Sellsword. And in a similar vein, I don't really like Dreadhorde Arcanist. And we're just going to be shaving 1 Titan Strength because it's our worst pump spell. This is how I sideboard against Rakdos Midrange. Gruul Aggro is the 7th most popular deck in Pioneer. There's a couple different flavors of this. There's a Prowessy Gruul Aggro deck and a Burning Tree Gruul Aggro deck. Both versions we're going to sideboard the same against. Obviously, we're bringing in the Fatal Pushes. We're bringing in the Reckless Rage because the name of the game is just answering what our opponent is doing and then to do our thing. So we're bringing out Claim to Fames. They don't run a ton of removal. They play like a Play with Fire, and that's pretty much it. We're bringing out a Dreadhorde Arcanist because I'd rather just be super, super duper duper fast. And then I like shaving a single Titan Strength and a single Emberheart Challenger, and that is how we sideboard against Gruul Aggro. The 8th most popular deck is Nykthos, mono green, Nykthos Ramp, whatever you want to call it. Against this deck, we are bringing in as much removal as possible because taking out the elves is pretty important, as well as the Reckless Rage because it can actually take out a little bit more than the elves are trying to jam as hard as we can. They don't play any removal to speak of, besides some versions are playing Tail Swipe or the Might Side and Pick Your Poison for Slickshot Show Off, but we're bringing out the Claim to Fame. This is a matchup where the combo is going to shine a lot. And there's an argument for Thoughtseize, but I would rather be as proactive as possible in this matchup. That being said, we're going to shave on Emberheart Challenger and then shave 1 pump spell, and that's how we sideboard against Nykthos Ramp. The 9th most popular deck is Boros Convoke. Against Convoke, we're bringing in Fatal Push, obviously, and Reckless Rage, obviously, just as much removal as possible. And really the only removal spells they have are Case in the main deck, and a lot are playing Knockout Blow and Get Lost in the sideboard, and some are playing Portable Hole. So I'm actually a fan of Claim to Fame because you do eventually have to kill them, but just be really aware because you can play around knockout blow in this deck. That being said, not a fan of Dreadhorde Arcanists because they're pretty fast and we really have to be able to be killing them as fast as possible as well. You're going to be shaving some Emberheart Challenger because again, they're fast. We don't have a lot of time to get a lot of value off of Emberheart Challenger. And then we're going to be shaving some Titan Strength. That's how I sideboard against Boros Convoke. And the 10th most popular deck in Pioneer, and the final deck that we're going to talk about how to sideboard against, we are playing against Hidden Strings and bringing in Thoughtseize. And Hidden Strings is kind of a weird situation where they're trying to combo really fast too, but we also have to kind of stop what they're doing. So the way I like to play against this deck is just go actual all in while having some disruption with the Thoughtseize. The matchup doesn't go long enough to bring in Hezret or Obnixilis, so we're going to be bringing out some Claim to Fame. The big thing you have to be worried about this is 9 lives, so going wide is pretty important, but we're going to be bringing out the Dreadhorde Arcanist just because it's really hard to get value out of. And an Ancestral Anger because we don't really care about trample, and that's a big reason why it makes it good. We get to draw a card, but I don't think we have enough time or we need to kill much faster. Then it'll make like the drawing the card relevant. And so this is how I sideboard against Hidden Strings. And today we're going to talk about flex slots in the new red-black aggro deck in Pioneer. Now the deck as a whole has been pretty figured out, but there are some flex slots that exist in this red-black aggro deck. By the way, if you'd like to learn about other parts of this red-black aggro deck, I have posted a deck tech and a sideboard guide previously on the channel. Be sure to check those out. But let's jump right into the not flex slots of the deck. These are the cards in the red-black deck that you can't really change. These are stock. So when you plan on making this deck or tuning this deck, these are the cards that really need to stay put, which if you look at the numbers at the top means that there are 5 flex slots in the main deck and 6 flex slots in the sideboard. So knowing that these are the cards that we're not going to touch, let's look at the flex slots. In those 5 slots, you can play any combination of 1 more Claim to Fame, that's the second Claim to Fame, Fatal Pushes 1 through 3, Ancestral Anger number 4, Reckless Rage 1 and 2, or a single Dreadhorde Arcanist. Now, each of these have different things that they're good against. Claim to Fame is, 1 black, you return target creature card mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is very, very good against decks that have non-exile removal and decks that things might go kind of long because you can still put on the pressure and not have to run a worse creature than you're already running. And on the Fame side, it's Aftermath, which means we cast it from graveyard after we cast Flame. Is target creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn, which if we have a ton of mana, we can bring something back and give it haste. But again, it's mostly if you plan on playing against decks like Red-Black Midrange or maybe the Mirror Match or something like that has non-exile removal, you might want to be playing Claim. Fatal Push is the best removal spell in Pioneer, bar none. It's 1 black instant, destroy target creature's mana value 2 or less. And then if we have Revolt, where if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, we deal something with mana value 4 or less. Now, this kills most things in the format, especially things that you care about since you're killing very, very quickly and are only worried about cheap stuff. But it's mostly good in our deck if we're playing against a lot of the Mirror Match or aggro decks or things like that, which is a good idea at this very moment because this deck is very popular. The 4th, Ancestral Anger. Ancestral Anger is just a pretty good pump spell if you want to be more all in on the primary plan rather than running this other kind of cute stuff in interaction, then you should be playing the 4th Ancestral Anger. The 2, Reckless Rage is an alternate to the Fatal Push. I think you should be running a maximum of 3 removal spells, minimum of 2 of any combination between Fatal Push and Reckless Rage. So if you're running the 3 Fatal Push, I would be on 0 Reckless Rage. If you're running up the entire 2 Reckless Rage, I would be only on like 1 Fatal Push in the main deck. But Reckless Rage is an instant, deals 4 damage to target creature you don't control and 2 damage to target creature you control. When we do that, the cards in our deck don't really die when we do that because they either have prowess or maybe we've pumped them up with a monster token or another pump spell or something like that. So the reason we would play a card like this is for creatures that our opponent have that are 3 or 4 mana because it's kind of hard for us to trigger Revolt, but toughness 4 or less. So I'm thinking of cards like Graveyard Trespasser or Adeline or things like that. If you're going to be playing against a lot of decks with those creatures and you're more worried about that, then I would be playing Reckless Rage. If you plan on playing against a lot more like aggro, I'd be playing Fatal Push. And then the Dreadhorde Arcanist is a 1/3 with trample, and whenever it attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Dreadhorde Arcanist power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. That spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. This card would be good against decks that the game's going to go long, that you're actually going to have a graveyard by the time you're attacking with Dreadhorde Arcanist, decks that Dreadhorde Arcanist is going to survive against. And so I would play the Dreadhorde Arcanist if you're a little worried about the interaction interrupting your first like push and want to reuse those cards in the graveyard because you know the game is going to go long. In the sideboard, we've already talked about Fatal Push. By the way, notice there are 5 total Fatal Push here. So obviously you're playing 3 Fatal Push in the main deck. You can play maximum of 1 in the sideboard. I feel like I shouldn't have to mention that, but I know I'm going to get a comment regarding it. But Fatal Push, very good against other aggressive decks, mostly. Feed the Swarms, 2-mana sorcery, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. This card's specifically very good against temporary lockdown, because temporary lockdown is just nutter butters against us, but also is decent against like other aggro decks or whatever. We already talked about the value of Reckless Rage, and then you could play the, I guess, second or third Claim to Fame in the sideboard. We already talked about the value of Claim to Fame. So these are the flex slots in the deck right now. You pick 6 of these, so really just take 1 away because there are 7 options for these flex slots. And today we're going to kind of round out our talk about the red-black aggro deck that we've been looking at over the course of the past few weeks through deck tech, sideboard guides, flex slots, and things like that. Where this week we're going to talk about nuances with the deck, things that might not be super obvious when you're playing the deck. And the list is a little short. The deck is reasonably easy to play, but it's still really important to know about these things when you're playing red-black aggro. Now, first off, and this is something that I mentioned during the deck tech, but I would also consider it a nuance, is Burn Together, which is the adventure side of Callous Sellsword, and pump spells. So the whole point of the deck is attacking, getting through damage with a bunch of crazy pump spells like Titan Strength and Monster's Rage and things like that. And so when you attack and then have a big pump spell turn, your creature is going to be 8 to 10, 11, 12 power sometimes. And very often you can kill somebody from 20 by dealing combat damage and then casting Burn Together to fling that creature and deal damage equal to its power to your opponent. So understand you want to pair Burn Together with those pump spells. Now, the interesting part of this is that a lot of the creatures in the deck have prowess-esque abilities. So it could be literal prowess like Monastery Swiftspear or like super prowess like Slickshot Show Off. So it's often much more than the pump spell itself. Now, if you pair Burn Together with Heartfire Hero, when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to the opponent. So that kind of doubles up with Burn Together. So you attack with Heartfire Hero, pump it up a few times. It gets Valiant, I think, is the ability. It's basically heroic, but counts for abilities as well. If Valiant's, pump it up to really like kind of artificially big with the pump spells. And then if you Burn Together, it deals combat damage, it deals damage from Heartfire Hero's trigger, and it deals the Burn Together fling damage, which is really incredible, actually. Similar to the Burn Together with pump spells, you can also have a massive Obnixilis paired with pump spells. So Casualty isn't caring about the mana cost, Casualty cares about its power. So similarly to Burn Together, you can have a big turn where you attack for a whole bunch, pump once or twice, and then look at your 7 to 12 power creature and sack it to Obnixilis to have a massive Obnixilis and immediately be able to alt. And the last kind of difficult to know when to do it nuance is Slickshot Show Off to avoid sorcery speed removal. There's a lot of very good sorcery speed removal like Portable Hole or Temporary Lockdown or things like that. And if you plot Slickshot Show Off, especially if you're not going to be casting any instants or sorceries that turn, it's actually very often worth it to hemorrhage that 1 damage you would get because of haste that 1 turn, to just play Slickshot Show Off for free the following turn, and then have all your mana for pump spells that following turn. Now, the thing you need to be careful about, like when you do this thing, is High Noon, because when you cast something off of plot, that is still casting, and people are playing High Noon for Phoenix and for red-black aggro. And so if you plot a Slickshot Show Off and then your opponent High Noons, you're in a lot of trouble, because now you can't pump spell after you bring back Slickshot Show Off. So just be very aware of that when you plot and use that kind of nuance. Now, if you like this video and everything you need to know about red-black aggro, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much. Burped. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.